Howdy, howdy, everybody. How we doing? Give a minute for viewers to populate. All right. So today we're going to be starting a history of God, the 4,000-year quest of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam by Karen Armstrong. She's a Princeton uh, Theological Seminary uh, and philosophy professor. I'm not going to read these. What's up, Roadhog? Did Roadhog? Did you know that I picked up Phantom? So it's Nomad. Saw you were first, sir, and thank you for the quick turnaround on the thumbnail. I know I don't plan these things out very well. All right, let's hit the introduction. So, as a child, I had a number of strong religious beliefs, but little faith in God. There is a distinction between belief in a set of propositions and a faith which enables us to put our trust in them. I believed implicitly in the existence of God, also believed in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, the efficacy of the sacraments, the prospect of eternal damnation, and the objective reality of purgatory. I cannot say, however, that my belief in these religious opinions about the nature of ultimate reality gave me much confidence that life here on earth was good or beneficent. The Roman Catholicism of my childhood was rather frightening creed. James Joyce got it right in Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. I listened to my share of hellfire sermons. In fact, hell seemed to be more potent reality than God because it was something that I could grasp imaginatively. God, on the other hand, was a somewhat shadowy figure, defined in intellectual abstractions rather than images. When I was about 8 years old, I had to memorize the catechism answer to the question, what is God? God is the Supreme Spirit who alone exists of himself and is infinite in all perfections. Not surprisingly, it meant little to me, and I am bound to say that it still leaves me cold. It has always seemed a singularly arid, pompous, and arrogant definition. Since writing this book, however, I have come to believe that it is also incorrect. As I grew up, I realized that there was more to religion than fear. I read the lives of the saints, the metaphysical poets, T.S. Eliot, and some of the simpler writings of the mystics. I began to be moved by the beauty of the liturgy, and though God remained distant, I felt that it was possible to break through to him, and that the vision would transfigure the whole of created reality. To do this, I entered a religious order, and as a novice and young nun, I learned to a good deal more about the faith. I applied myself to apologetics, scripture, theology, and church history. I delved into the history of the monastic life and embarked on a minute discussion of the rule of my own order, which we had to learn by heart. Strangely enough, God figured very little in any of this. Attention seemed focused on secondary details and the more peripheral aspects of religion. I wrestled with myself in prayer, trying to force my mind to encounter God. But he remained a stern master who observed my every infringement of the rule or tantalizingly absent. The more I read about the raptures of the saints, the more of a failure I felt. I was unhappily aware that what little religious experience I had somehow been manufactured by myself as I worked upon my own feelings and imagination. Sometimes a sense of devotion was an aesthetic response to the beauty of the Gregorian chant and the liturgy. But nothing had actually happened to me from a source beyond myself. I never glimpsed the God described by the prophets and the mystics, Jesus Christ, about whom we taught far more than about God, seemed a purely historical figure, inextricably embedded in late antiquity. I also began to have grave doubts about some of the doctrines of the church. How could anybody possibly know for certain that the man Jesus had been God incarnate? And what did such a belief mean? Did the New Testament really teach the elaborate and highly self contradictory doctrine of the Trinity? Or was this, like so many other articles of the faith, a fabrication by theologians centuries after the death of Christ in Jerusalem? Eventually, with regret, I left the religious life, and once freed of the burden of failure and inadequacy, I felt my belief in God slip quietly away. He had never really impinged upon my life, although I had done my best to enable him to do so. Now that I no longer felt so guilty and anxious about him, he became too remote to be a reality. My interest in religion continued, however, and I made a number of television programs about the early history of Christianity and the nature of the religious experience. The more I learned about the history of religion, the more my earlier misgivings appeared justified. The doctrines that I had accepted without question as a child were indeed man made, constructed over a long period. Science seemed to have disposed of the creator God, and biblical scholars had proved that Jesus had never claimed to be divine. As an epileptic, I had flashes of visions that I knew to be a mere neurological defect. Had the visions and raptures of the saints also been a mere mental quirk? Increasingly, God seemed to be an aberration, something that the human race had outgrown. Jeff, Jeff, you can't do that to me, my friend. That that is not uh that's not very nice when I'm trying to drink. What's up, Basso? Finkel. Not yet. Not yet, Finkel. We haven't got to Egypt land yet. Let's see, where was I? Jeff made me lose my place, y'all. It's his fault. My ideas, let's see, despite my years as a nun, I do not believe that my experience of God is unusual. My ideas about God were formed in childhood and did not keep abreast of my growing knowledge in other disciplines. I had revised simplistic childhood views of Father Christmas. I had come to a more mature. No, you're good. You're good. We need a little comedic break now and then. Now I've got What's her name? It stuck in my brain. Dare you? Okay. More mature understanding of the complexities of the human predicament than had been possible in kindergarten. Yet, my early, confused ideas about God had not been modified or developed. People without my peculiarly religious background may also find that their notion of God was formed in infancy. Since those days, we have put away childish things and have discarded the God of our first years. Just pass the blame on to Shiz. Uh, pass, give, I guess. Um, Yet, my study of the history of religion has revealed that human beings are spiritual animals. Indeed, there is a case for arguing that Homo sapiens is almost homo religious. Men and women started to worship gods as soon as they became recognizably human. They created religions at the same time as they created works of art. This was not simply because they wanted to propi- propitiate powerful forces. These early faiths expressed the wonder and mystery that seem always to have been an essential component of the human experience of this beautiful yet terrifying world. Like art, religion has been an attempt to find meaning and value in life, despite the suffering that flesh is heir to. Like any other human activity, religion can be abused, but it seems to have been something that we have always done. It was not tacked on to a primordially secular nature, but a manipulative kings and priests, but was natural to humanity. Indeed, our current secularism is an entirely new experiment, unprecedented in human history. We have yet to see how it will work. It is also true to say that our Western liberal humanism is not something that comes naturally to us. Like an appreciation of art or poetry, it has to be cultivated. Humanism is itself a religion without God. Not all religions, of course, are theistic. Our ethical, secular ideal has its own disciplines of mind and heart and gives people the means of finding faith in the ultimate meaning of human life that were once provided by the more conventional religions. Let's see. What's up, Misty? When I began to research this history of the idea and experience of God and the three related monotheistic faiths of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, in order, by the way, in a chronological order, I expected to find that God had simply been a projection of human needs and desires. I thought that He would mirror the fears and yearnings of society at each stage of its development. My predictions were not entirely unjustified, but I have been extremely surprised by some of my findings, and I wish that I had learned all of this 30 years ago when I was starting out in the religious life. It would have saved me a great deal of anxiety to hear from eminent monotheists in all three faiths that instead of waiting for God to descend on high, I should deliberately create a sense of Him for myself. Other rabbis, priests, and Sufis would have taken me to task for assuming that God was in any sense a reality out there. They would have warned me not to expect to experience him as an objective fact, that could be discovered by the ordinary process of rational thought. They would have told me that in an important sense, God was a product of the creative imagination, like the poetry and music that I found so inspiring. A few highly respected monotheists would have told me quietly and firmly that God did not really exist, and yet that He was the most important reality in the world. This book will not be a history of the ineffable reality of God itself, which is beyond time and change, but a history of the way men and women have perceived him from Abraham to the present day. The human idea of God has a history since it has always meant something slightly different to each group of people who have used it at various points of time. The idea of God, formed in one generation by one set of human beings, could be meaningless in another. Indeed, the statement, I believe in God, has no objective meaning as such, but like any other statement, only means something in context when proclaimed by a particular community. Consequently, there is no one unchanging idea contained in the word God. Instead, the word contains a whole spectrum of meanings, some of which are contradictory or even mutually exclusive. Had the notion of God not had this flexibility, it would not have survived to become one of the great human ideas. When one conception of God has ceased to have meaning or relevance, it has been quietly discarded and replaced by a new theology. A fundamentalist would deny this, since fundamentalism is anti historical. It believes that Abraham, Moses, and the latter prophets all experienced their God in exactly the same way as people do today. Yet, if we look at our three religions, it becomes clear that there is no objective view of God. Each generation has to create the image of God that works for it. The same is true of atheism. The statement, I do not believe in God, has meant something slightly different at each period of history. The people who have been dubbed atheists over the years have always denied a particular conception of the divine. It is the God who is rejected by atheists today, the God of the patriarchs, the God of the prophets, and the God of the philosophers, the God of the mystics, or the God of the 18th century deists. All these deities have been venerated as the God of the Bible and the Quran by Jews, Christians, and Muslims at various points of their history. We shall see that they are very different from one another. Atheism has often been a transitional state. Thus, Jews, Christians, and Muslims were all called atheists by their pagan contemporaries because they had adopted a revolutionary notion of divinity. Their transcendence is modern atheism, a similar denial of a God which is no longer adequate to the problems of our time. Despite its otherworldliness, religion is highly pragmatic. We shall see that it is far more important for a particular idea of God to work than for it to be logically or scientifically sound. As soon as it ceases to be effective, it will be changed, sometimes for something radically different. This did not disturb most monotheists before our own day because they were quite clear that their ideas about God were not sacrosanct but could only be provisional. They were entirely man made. They could be nothing else. and quite separate from the indescribable reality they symbolized. Some developed quite audacious ways of emphasizing this essential distinction. Sorry, something else caught my eye. One medieval mystic went so far as to say that this ultimate reality, mistakenly called God, was not even mentioned in the Bible. Throughout history, men and women have experienced a dimension of the spirit that seems to transcend the mundane world. Indeed, it is an arresting characteristic of the human mind to be able to conceive concepts that go beyond it in this way. However, we choose to, well, however way we choose to interpret this human experience of transcendence has been a fact of life. Not everybody would regard it as divine. Buddhists, as we shall see, would deny that their visions and insights are derived from a supernatural source. They see them as natural to humanity. All the major religions, however, would agree that it is impossible to describe this transcendence in normal conceptual language. Monotheists have called this transcendence God, but they have hedged this around with important provisos. Jews, for example, are forbidden to pronounce the sacred name of God, and Muslims must not attempt to depict the divine in visual imagery. The discipline is a reminder that the reality that we call God exceeds all human expression. Sorry, my eyes were burning. Misty. This will not be a history of the usual sense, since the idea of God has not evolved from one point of and progressed in a linear fashion to a final conception. Scientific notions work like that, but the idea of art and religion do not, just as they are only given a number of themes in love poetry. So too, people have kept saying the same things about God over and over again. Indeed, we shall find a striking similarity in Jewish, Christian, and Muslim ideas of the divine. I guess for old men, it is coded, but I mean, I'll read you this bedtime story. I I know I'm a monotone reader, so even though Jews and Muslims both find the Christian doctrines of the Trinity and incarnation almost blasphemous, they have produced their own versions of these controversial theologies. Each expression of these universal themes is slightly different, however, showing the ingenuity and inventiveness of the human imagination as it struggles to express its sense of God. Because this is such a big subject, I have deliberately confined myself to the one God worshipped by Jews, Christians, and Muslims, though I have occasionally considered pagan, Hindu, and Buddhist conceptions of the ultimate reality to make monotheistic point clearer. It seems that the idea of God is remarkably close to ideas in religions that developed quite independently. Whatever conclusions we reach about the reality of God, the history of this idea must tell us something important about the human mind and the nature of our aspirations. Despite the secular tenor of much Western society, the idea of God still affects the lives of millions of people. Uh, look at all the wrenches. Let's see. We give wrenches out for punishment over here, coded. So you haven't been kicked, have you? So despite the secular tenor of much Western society, the idea of God still affects the lives of millions of people. Recent surveys have shown that 99% of Americans say that they believe in God. The question is, which God of the many on offer do they subscribe to? Theology often comes across as dull and abstract, but the history of God has been passionate and intense. Unlike some other conceptions of the ultimate, it was originally attended by agonizing struggle and stress. The prophets of Israel experienced their God as a physical pain that wrenched their every limb and filled them with rage and elation. The reality that they called God was often experienced by monotheists in a state of extremity. We shall read of mountaintops, darkness, desolation, crucifixion, and terror. The Western experience of God seemed particularly traumatic. What was the other reason for this inherent strain? Other monotheists spoke of light and transfiguration. They used very daring imagery to express the complexity of the reality they experienced, which went far beyond the orthodox theology. There has recently been a revived interest in mythology, which may indicate a widespread desire for a more imaginative expression of religious truth. The work of the late American scholar Joseph Campbell has become extremely popular. That is because of Jordan Peterson. He has explored the perennial mythology of mankind, linking ancient myths with those still current in traditional societies. It is often assumed that the three god religions are devoid of mythology and poetic symbolism. Yet, although monotheists originally rejected the myths of their pagan neighbors, these often crept back into the faith at a later date. Mystics have seen God incarnated in a woman, for example. Others reverently speak of God's sexuality and have introduced a female element into the divine. This brings me to a difficult point. Because this god began as a specifically male deity, monotheists have usually referred to it as he. In recent years, feminists have understandably objected to this. Since I shall be recording the thoughts and insights of people who call God he, I have used the conventional masculine terminology, except when it has been more appropriate. Yet, it is perhaps worth mentioning that the masculine tenor of God talk is particularly problematic in English. In Hebrew, Arabic, and French, however, grammatical gender gives theological discourse a sort of sexual counterpoint and dialectic, which provides a balance that is often lacking in English. Thus, in Arabic, Allah, the supreme name for God, is grammatically masculine, but the word for the divine and inscrutable essence of God is al-Dahat is feminine. This is a she writing this book, Vegas Vips. Jody D and Spartan. Go do some more push ups, son. I'll talk about God staggers under impossible difficulties. Yet, monotheists have all been very positive about language at the same time as they have denied its capacity to express the transcendent reality. The God of Jews, Christians, and Muslims is a God who, in some sense, speaks. His word is crucial in all three faiths. The word of God has shaped the history of our culture. We have decided whether the word God has any meaning for us today. She's not the one that goes on YouTube and shows off their skills in doing push ups. Note, since I am looking at the history of God from the Jewish and the Muslim, as well as the Christian perspective, the terms BC and AD, which are conventionally used in the West, are not appropriate. I have therefore had recourse to the alternatives BCE, before the Common Era, and CE, the Common Era, not area. All right. That's all I wanted to share with you today. On this, I wanted to get the introduction out of the way. And tomorrow we'll start on the chapters. We have 635 pages to go. Um, unless anybody has any questions, comments. Um, I know, coded about as bad as a reader as you are a speller and a husband and a father. Huh. We had the same idea. Oh man. Bad when you have that reputation, doesn't it? Isn't it coded? But Apple not falling far and stuff. You too, Groovy. No, no, it's actually pretty nice. Today me and Phantom have been out playing a good bit. So I'm off until the 16th. So you're absolutely right. I am. But I see my kids all the time. Talk to them every day. You claiming a negative, you've got to you make the proof. Hey, Linda P, and who's the bestest girl, Hazel? I have the bestest boy. Nah. Yeah, I just spent a week on the road with my youngest child. We were in Vail and St. Louis and Pennsylvania. You know, religions are people. I think it's probably more like the people. I don't blame religion. I don't know, coded. I don't ask. All right, y'all. Bobby's going on a rant. So I am going to finish this stream up and we will probably see you guys over at the Hill Pirates later. Y'all have a good one. Probably same time tomorrow. Um, I may wait till 3 so more people can jump on. So y'all have a good one.